Welcome to this week's episode of Insider. I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and I'll be your host. Since 6:29 a.m. on October 7th, 2023, Israelis have found themselves on a relentless journey of trauma. Each day since that fateful morning has been punctuated by sirens, artillery fire, and the ever-present echoes of grief and fear. The massacre at the Nova Music Festival and the atrocities across towns and villages in Israel's south left scars that extend far beyond the physical, searing in to the national psyche. The horror of those events and the propaganda that followed was not just an assault on Israel, but an attack on the very fabric of humanity. In today's show, we confront the unspoken aftermath, the enduring psychological toll on individuals and society, grappling with loss, fear, and uncertainty. Is Israel, as some have said, a nation in trauma? How do survivors like Tomer and Yoav, who you are about to meet, begin to heal? And what would it take to construct a mental health iron dome to protect our collective well-being? Joining me are four voices uniquely equipped to tackle these questions. Professor Mark Weiser, director of the Division of Psychiatry at Sheba Medical Center. Manny Waks, host of the podcast PTSD Nation and a passionate mental health advocate. And Nova Festival survivors Tomer Zadik and Yoav who will share their powerful stories. Mark, I want to get started with you. Can you define trauma for us? When we say we are traumatized, what are we talking about? Is this something diagnosable?
PTSD is diagnosable, post-traumatic stress disorder. When people are exposed to extreme stress, perhaps endangering their lives, then they can have psychiatric problems afterwards. Important to remember that the trauma is the trauma and the person's response is the person's response. And different people respond to trauma in very different ways. Many of the people, I'm sure we're going to hear from our friends here today, had difficult experiences after the party. Some of them did very poorly for a while afterwards, and then things worked out. Some, the minority, were not able to work things out. So trauma is trauma, but the question is, how do people respond to the trauma?
So what causes one person then to experience that trauma and another not to?
There are many predisposing factors to what causes a person to respond better or poorly. People who have, before the trauma, were better adjusted, have family support, fewer psychiatric problems, were doing better overall, were more likely to do better over time. People who, to begin with, had difficulty with some issues and some different problems might do less well. The severity of the trauma. Some people are exposed to very severe trauma. Other people are exposed to a much less threatening situations. That also can have an effect. We just published a paper showing that we thought the people who were using drugs during the party would actually be doing worse. That was not the case. In fact, it was the people who were drinking alcohol who were more likely to develop a bad psychiatric reactions. The people who were using drugs, even though we thought that they would be doing less well, we were wrong in our hypothesis, and we published that recently.
Now, I want to move over to you, Manny, for just a moment, because you have a podcast that's called PTSD Nation, and I'm wondering, are we a nation in trauma?
I think that it's important to remember that the State of Israel was a nation founded on trauma from the ashes of the Holocaust. And then we continued on to the war of the first war, to the establishment of the State of Israel, and then constant terrorism attacks. So I think throughout Israel's history, the people living in it, our citizens, we have all endured some form of trauma. And over the years, certainly decades ago, there has been very limited understanding of the issues around trauma and PTSD in particular. So the issues around education and the response and the treatment options, basically, I think those who have not had significant trauma pre-October 7th, I think post-October 7th, many more have been added to that list. So I think it's important to be careful and not to suggest that everyone in Israel is traumatized, but I think certainly a lot of us have experienced and endured some form of trauma, and as the Professor has said, that only some people go on to be affected by PTSD and other forms of issues that may arise as a result of that trauma.
Interesting. Now, I do want to turn over to Tomer and Yoav. And before we get started talking about whatever treatment options or what you've gone through afterwards, I'd actually like you to spend a few minutes sharing the story of what happened to you on October 7th. Who'd like to start?
I think I'll start. So basically on October 7th, we went to the Nova Music Festival. It was our first music festival of that kind. 6:30 in the morning, we were resting at the tents. It was pretty nice. Alarm started. We quickly got in the car and we said, okay, alarms, close to Gaza, nothing to look for. We wanted to get back to Tel Aviv, but people started shouting that there are terrorists on the road. So we said, okay, let's turn the car around and just drive away from that. We started driving towards south, and after around 3 minutes of driving, maybe 2.5, a group of 4 terrorists ambushed us on the road. I saw them, I started making a U-turn. They saw us, they started shooting. Midway through the U-turn, both me and Yoav got hit with 3 bullets each one. I got all the 3 bullets in my right arm. Yoav, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. I was hit midway through the U-turn. I tried to complete the U-turn, but my hand just stopped functioning. Quickly, I managed to take control of the car with my left arm. We managed to drive away from there for another minute or a minute and a half until my car broke. It stopped driving after what happened. And then we came to a medical care tent.
When we arrived at the tent, there were a lot of medics. The tent was there initially because it was there for the party, big party, so they had to bring some kind of medical support. We arrived there, they gave us a few bandages, not too serious, they fell off after a few minutes. We were sitting there for about 15 to 20 minutes. We were thinking that probably soon an ambulance will come, evacuation will come. We didn't think we were going to spend a lot of time there. But after 15 minutes sitting there, another ambush of terrorists arrived and we started running. We found ourselves in the bushes. We were always moving from one bush to another every 2 or 3 minutes because from every direction other terrorists arrived. So you always had to be on the move. You couldn't stay in one place for too long. And we were hiding there for about 2 hours.
All of this with bullet wounds?
Yes.
Yes.
And after 2 hours, I lost Tomer at some point in the bushes. And I heard Hebrew very strong, and I was with 3 other people that I didn't know. So we all went together to the Voices, and we saw a tank of the IDF that was disarmed, but a lot of civilians next to it and a few medical people. So we joined them, and it was about 3 hours after the first bullet, and this is where I got my first real tourniquet.
And ultimately, you obviously made it out. How long did it take till you finally got to, let's say, away from the terrorists?
So we have a little bit of different stories. Most of the time we were together. We were separated for about an hour. When Yoav reached the tank, I was alone in the woods. I reached the tank about a few minutes after Yoav, and I was evacuated. Yoav was evacuated first, but his evacuation car was taken into Re'im.
Yes. Basically what happened is that the police officer that was there, he told us that there's an ambulance waiting for us in Re'im, but he didn't know that Re'im wasn't in Israeli territory anymore. So we came to Re'im, me and 3 other people. One of them was also injured. We entered Re'im, and another mass of bullets was shooting towards us. Luckily, no one got hurt at that time. We were able to get past the bullets, but the other car broke again, and we were hiding there for about 2 hours. At that point, I was 6 hours with a tourniquet on me, so my right arm was getting black. So while I was waiting, I decided to release some of the tourniquet to get the blood flowing again, to save my arm. And after a few hours there, we saw an IDF force that didn't came with intention to rescue us. They came to fight, but they saw us and they got us rescued. And it was an overall of 8 hours.
Unbelievable. Now, I want to ask you, what kind of symptoms of trauma have you experienced since that day, and how have these symptoms affected your daily lives? Maybe you can start that, Yoav.
So the first thing I would say is that when you talk about symptoms and how they affected us, I think that it's something that's still ongoing. Some symptoms and some effects of the trauma I'm still finding up till this day. And for a lot of the things, it's moving. You know, at the beginning, it was very tough for me to get inside the car and not speak about driving. After a few months, after treatment, now I reach here today with my car. At the beginning, it was tough for me to sleep. I don't know, in Purim, when the kids throw the things that make the noise, obviously I jump. It's a lot of stuff, and it's an ongoing thing. It's still an ongoing process, and I think that it's tough to say that this process, just for me, you know, personally, it's tough to say. I think that I'm still living this trauma as long as that our nation is at war, and we wake up to alarms every day, and we have people out there in Gaza being kidnapped. So for me, I cannot give you the end to your question because I'm still in the middle of my story.
And tell me, has the country been supportive? Have you felt like you've been able to have access to the tools that you need in order to get the help that is required?
So we get a lot of help, not necessarily from the country. A lot of private foundations and companies that help with mental issues and help with paying for school or a lot of stuff. We do get some help from the country. It's basically just money every month, not too much.
Yeah, and not every month because sometimes they skip the payment. You know, when you owe them, they never skip it. But when it's the other side, then...
But most of the help we're getting is from private projects.
Unbelievable. Now, Mark, I want to turn to you about this because I understand that there's a really deep shortage of trauma therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists in the country. Tell me about that deficit. Are we able to meet the demands?
We're nowhere near able to meet the demand pre-October 7th. Okay, there were not enough psychiatrists since Corona. There was a tremendous increase in depression and anxiety in the population. And even before Corona, there weren't too many of us around. So Israel has not been producing enough doctors, and of the doctors, not enough of them have become psychiatrists. The conditions in the public service have been quite poor up till now. Psychiatry is not attractive, public psychiatry. Most psychologists are going to do much more work in the private sector, social workers, therapists. Since the 7th of October, that has begun to change. There's been more awareness of the need because of people of things like what Manny has been doing. There's been much more awareness of the need for psychiatrists, psychologists. We've been doing training therapists to administer trauma-based therapies. There's been a great improvement. Actually, quite recently, the government has improved significant pay raises for psychiatrists to increase psychiatry as being something more popular, and there'll be hopefully many more psychiatrists. But right now, November 2024, these guys are not getting. There's not enough psychiatrists, psychologists available to them.
And what does happen if somebody goes untreated, if they need treatment but can't get it?
They could stay. They could stay. They could stay badly. I very much liked what you said because you described symptoms before you came. When we were chatting, you said that you're a student in university, et cetera, et cetera. So you're exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, it sounds like you guys had a horrible time, but you're dealing with it. You're in school. You're doing stuff. I hope you have a date with a nice girl tonight. And, you know, moving on and moving on. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that you're not symptomatic. It means that you're dealing with it. And as you said in the beginning, you couldn't drive. And then you could drive a little bit. And today you drive here with your car. Very well done to you, sir. This is exactly the way things should be.
Thank you.
And, you know, it's interesting because we're here and we're having a whole show where we're all feeling very comfortable to talk about trauma. But, Manny, the truth is I understand that a lot of people don't want to talk about trauma. Why do you think it is such a stigma to talk about mental health issues?
Mental health and PTSD is still a relatively taboo issue in our society, and the stigmas that are attached to it. And while in our society we've made some significant headway in recent years,
and certainly in recent months,
absolutely in recent months, there is still that fear of feeling shameful, feeling guilty perhaps, because we've only spoken about obviously mental health in the context of this type of violence, of terrorism and war. Of course, PTSD and mental health can also come from other factors such as child sexual abuse, bereavement, domestic violence, etc. So these are not things that people are comfortable speaking about ordinarily, let alone when you add to that the impact it has on mental health. Are people going to think I'm weak? Are people going to think I'm mentally unstable or even crazy? So there is that fear of wanting to talk about it.
And Manny, you have your own story, which we're not going to have probably time to get into today, but you were actually a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And do you feel that people judged you when you would talk about your story?
Absolutely. I mean, I think initially when I went public with my story about the child sexual abuse component of it in about 2011, just uttering those words, child sexual abuse, automatically people did not know how to respond. Often they froze rather than me, the PTSD sufferer. And I think I'm finding a similar situation unfolding in the context of mental health, where you start talking to some people about it, they're not sure what to say, how to respond, whether to motivate you, whether to say, to feel sorry for you. So, but again, post 7th of October, and especially in recent months, we're seeing much more acceptance, much more discussion around it, much more understanding, much more empathy, and much more funding as well from a variety of sources. So we are seeing seismic changes.
And Mark, going back to you just for a moment, I was just at the Jewish Federations of North America General Assembly, and speaking to the chair there, they had said they'd invested $750 million in Israel to help some with the rehabilitation post-October 7th, but then said that they were going to need to raise quite a bit more money, not necessarily for rebuilding homes or putting people back in their homes, but actually to deal with the mental health crisis in the country. Is that something that you feel is going to be an ongoing challenge? And how much money and how much time do we need in order to be able to heal this country, if you think it needs healing?
We need help. We certainly need help. I mean, the experiences that these two young men have described certainly would warrant them whatever help that we can give them. As a country, we are surviving. As a country, remember, the majority of people get up in the morning and they go to work, and they come home and they have dinner with their families, and we're dealing with this. Some people have very difficult memories to deal with. Other people are very worried about their child or their husband in reserve duty in the military. But overall, we're functioning, and we have to function. That's in our DNA. Our DNA is to do just as these guys have described. It was rough. I had a difficult time. I was concerned about my arm, but I came back, I went to, and I did my stuff. Specifically regarding donations from the U.S., we've had donations. We are greatly expanding our mental health services all over the country. It's not just Sheba, it's the psychiatric community in general. Sheba also specifically, we're opening up clinics in the north, in the south, in Jerusalem, and we're actually using the money of these donors to expand our mental health care greatly.
So we're only going to have time for a couple more questions, and I actually want to ask Manny and then go back to you to end the program. Manny, there is this concept of a mental health Iron Dome. Tell me, what that looks like in practice. What do you think we need to put into place to truly protect people in this country, protect their mental well-being?
First and foremost, we need to change the culture around mental health by normalising the conversation around this issue. And how do we do that? I think first and foremost by education, and that's got to focus on both the prevention, how do we prevent the onset of PTSD, and also the intervention, meaning when someone goes through trauma and we see symptoms, how do we address it? We need to focus on training professionals, as the professor raised before, that we don't have sufficient numbers. We need to focus on making programs and treatments accessible to everyone. And of course, we need increased funding, because the funding that we've had until now, pre-October 7th, was minuscule, vastly insufficient. We need to change that and to invest in this, because ultimately, if we don't look after those people who have endured these traumas, and often, as we said, there's shame, there's guilt, often they won't necessarily go and seek treatments themselves. We need to encourage and facilitate that, and us as a society, not just those individuals, the entire society will be much better for it.
So Yoav gosh, I just lost it. And Tomer, I want to circle back to you. Did what Manny say resonate with you? And as a final message, what do each of you need from this country in order to be able to thrive again?
I think a big problem with specifically the Nova musical survivors, sorry, is that in the end of the day, me and Tomer, like, we're regular people. We wake up, we go to school to study our degree, we go back, we walk our dog, we go to sleep. But a lot of people in the society, when they hear about the Nova survivors, they think about drug addicts, and they think about junkies, and they think about people who dance all night and all day and never going to work, never going to school, and that's not us.
They're judging you.
That's not 90% of us. It's like most of the people who went there are people like me and Tomer, and like everyone who's listening. And we're just regular people who went to listen to some music.
Yeah, and Tomer, what about you? 30 seconds.
What do I want from the country and from the people? I think from the country, if I'll do it quick, as Yoav said, for us, it's very important, specifically for me, not to be only the survivor, but to be more and expand and continue with my life, which means 2 months after everything that happened, both of us started school. It hasn't been easy. It's not easy at all. Normally, students in Israel, they go to work. I can't be a waiter. I can't lift more than 2 kilograms in my hand. I got shot 3 times. So we need help. We need help financially. We need help with people that helping us and providing us everything we need. And we need from everyone around us to understand that healing takes time. I'm okay right now. I started studying. I'm happy. I'm enjoying my life, but I'm not healed. It's going to take a lot of time.
We have to have the patience. Well, that is unfortunately all of the time that we have this evening. I want to thank you, all of our guests, for being here tonight. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching Insider. Have a safe and pleasant evening.